What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to CM Aviation. Hope you're on a fantastic day today. And today I have a very exciting model review for you all. Today's kind of a different one. Today we're going to be taking a look at a model that's been released many times. This is the GeminiJets Delta Airlines Boeing 737-900 ER. So many of you are probably wondering why I'm choosing to review this aircraft today, considering that there's been several iterations of it and quite a few different circumstances with it. Well, I'll kind of explain that as we get into the aircraft today, but we're going to start with the box and it'll make a little bit more sense once we get into this a little bit. So GeminiJets made for collectors by collectors. Here's the rendering of the aircraft right here, 737-900 ER, and then you have the Delta logo Sky Team. Now, once again, Gemini has done many versions of this with scimitars. Now this is like the 5th or 6th one. They also did several without scimitars before they acquired those. Now this is the 2023 release, so more recent one, and we do have a little bit of boxware, but it doesn't bother me too much. I got it for $30 on eBay, and I've been looking for another one to bulk up my fleet a little bit, get some variety or get some more depth for Albuquerque. It particularly can get multiple 739s at once, which is pretty cool. But not only that, we also have the asset of Great Plains, so that's a big portion of this aircraft, but that's not really the reason I'm reviewing it today. So the main reason I'm reviewing this aircraft today is I do want to prove that GeminiJets, while they're not perfect with molds like this, particularly their Boeing 737s and A320s, the models are still not bad. I think there's this huge misconception that, just because there's a little bit of wing flex and a bad nose design and large engines means that the aircraft is unusable, and that is certainly not the case here for an aircraft like this. Now, I'm not going to tell you that it's better than the NG version. I think that goes without saying, but what I am going to tell you that I think for casual collectors, and that's key emphasis, casual collectors, this is an acceptable aircraft. So that said, we're going to go ahead and take a look at some of the details, and I'll point out some of the really nice aspects. I'll also point out some of the flaws, and then you all in the comments can let me know what you think. So with that said, let's not waste any further time and go ahead and get started here with the aircraft. Now I got to adjust this table up a little bit because we're kind of in a tough spot here on the stairways. So attempting to get the best views that we can, but it can be a little challenging at times. That's not too bad. That should be pretty good here for today. Let's go ahead and take a look at the Delta 737-900 ER by GeminiJets. If I can, let me see if I can do any better here. There we go. That's even better. All right, let's take a look at this, everyone. So starting up here, we're going to start with probably the worst part of the aircraft, and that's the nose cone. It is still a poor proportional shape. I wouldn't say it's egregious, but it's certainly not correct. So that's the most disappointing aspect of the mold. I think that's pretty fair to say. It looks pretty rough, and there's no doubt that it is not there. So that's just a honest observation, but if we can get past that, we do pretty good. The cockpit windows are also pretty solid. They're not too bad. You also have the windshield wipers, which are nice. The nose landing gear and nose landing gear door also not great. Nose landing gear door, especially on this particular version of this aircraft, the nose landing gears you can kind of see is pointed up too far. I'll give you a little better view. So that's also a aspect of this aircraft that is not there, but sometimes you just got to get past the details like that. The Sky Team logo and L1 door and the printing on the entire aircraft is quite nice. Delta sticker for it being the best airline of 2022 or whichever iteration that they used here, so no surprise to see that. Got some panel details down here, and you get the first class. Now, I've still not flown Delta 737, which is kind of unbelievable to me, unless if I'm forgetting off the top of my head, but I do not think I've flown Delta 737, which is crazy. I'm making every effort to change that, but at this moment, I've flown Delta Airbuses, the A321, and yeah, Delta's just a tough airline to get on. And I've flown a couple A220s, and they're more obscure aircraft, the 757, 767, A330, and even the A350. But I've failed to fly the Airbuses, the Boeing 737s, which is pretty crazy, unless if I'm forgetting. I very well could be, but I think I would have remembered by now if I would have flown Delta 737. Anyway, enough about that. You can tell the printing's nice. I like the Delta. The Wi-Fi boxes are also slightly too big, but definitely not the biggest flaw on the aircraft. But you get into the Delta Comfort Plus section, which starts about after that A or so, and there's a nice 6 rows of that. So yeah, it's definitely a great section. Delta Comfort Plus can be reasonable on the prices. I like that. They make money on it, so I can't blame them for charging what they charge, but in my opinion, I think it's way too high on most of those United routes. But the Delta, much more reasonable, which is nice, and they do a good job selling those. Apologies about this tripod. I'll get a little bit more slack there. That was way too clunky. Here's the middle of the aircraft. We know the story about the antennas, so we don't need to go into that, but you can tell it kind of fits the Wi-Fi boxes, to be honest. You have the emergency wing exits, which are nicely printed. Fortunately, on this particular release, in many of the recent 737s, the wing flex has not been nearly as bad of a problem. You can see over here that it's honestly fair. Now, there's still a little too much, but you can even see a little bit of flex back on that, downward, which is nice. So that's very cool. And then you have the engine, which once again, as assessed, it is too big, but what can you do about it? I can kind of forgive it a little bit. It matches the aerials a little bit better, so that part's kind of nice. But once you put it with the fuselage, after seeing an NG, I can definitely see the reason for constructive criticism here. But it's not changing anytime soon, so we'll see what happens long term. Also, Gemini 737 scimitars are, a little too big, but once again, it's similar to the engines, kind of matches, so not quite as big of a deal in my opinion. But yeah, the wing detail is really nice. I love the indentations and so forth. They're pretty nice. So certainly happy about those details. Main landing gears also look pretty good on this aircraft, so another pretty good effort there for sure. Still looking quite nice. And you got the Wi-Fi box and the emergency exit door. Printing once again very good and level. This is a place where Gemini thrives, so we love to see that. And then you have the Wi-Fi box in the back, which I think is a little bit better, so definitely happy with the effort there. And you got the US flag. The registration of this aircraft is number 856 Delta November. And you got the back portion here, and this is probably the best portion of the aircraft's the tail and the horizontal stabilizers. A very good shape here on the tail. Might be just slightly off, but not noticeable. And then you also have the horizontal stabilizers, which are also nicely put on there. They are plastic, but if you can get past that, and not think about that, they're pretty good. And you got the APU back here as well, which is pretty nice. The shape kind of seems weird from this vantage point. Maybe it's just me. I'll look at some of the pictures that I have and see if that's a true statement or if my eyes are playing games. And yeah, the rest of this aircraft, you got the tail stump back there too, and overall it looks quite nice. So let's go ahead and flip it. Look at some perspectives on our way over. The right wing does have a little bit more flex than the left, which is all right. It is what it is. If the baggage door there looks quite nice, the nose looks really rough on that side, but the engine looks a little bit better here. Yeah, the right side, I would say, looks probably a little bit better than the left, but still, there are some shortcomings, and this is probably the worst mold that Gemini has, one of them for sure. And, if this is the worst that it is, I think you can get past it. Top of the aircraft looks really nice, definitely a nice effort there. And then the bottom, you do have the Delta underbelly, which is cool. And then landing gear hubs also are navy, which is great. So love the detail there. And you have the baggage door as well, if I forgot to mention that. So overall,